Perhaps the most commonsensical approach to this question is to suggest that there are certain types of characteristics of people that humans in general find attractive. The most obvious of these is physical attractiveness, so we'll start there. Physical beauty. Lots of research supports the notion that humans are more attracted in general to physically attractive people. They'd rather be with them, talk to them. It's almost a tautological finding. So, people are attracted to those who are physically attractive. Stop the presses! Wow, you must be thinking you psychologists really dig for the controversial, thought-provoking answers. More interesting, of course, is the question, what creates this bias for physically attractive people and what makes a person beautiful to begin with? There are 4 possible general areas which have been discussed to answer these questions. First, the obvious has been suggested. Beautiful people are more aesthetically pleasing in some way. That is, certain objects are more pleasing to look at than other objects. Thus, this approach has tried to identify exactly what aesthetic features of attractive people might make them attractive. This perspective gets less at exactly what creates the beauty bias and more at what exactly people tend to perceive as beautiful. First, one interesting example of this approach suggests that the most beautiful people are those that are the most physically average. Research conducted by Judith Langolis and Lori Rogman illustrates this. They took pictures of 16 or 32 people's faces, and after entering them into a computer, had the computer average them, such that it produced a composite or average face from the 16 or 32 original faces. Then they had persons rate all of the faces, including the composites, on physical attractiveness. Participants were unaware that the composites were not real people. Results indicated that the averaged faces were viewed as more attractive than the actual individual faces. Composites constructed on fewer faces tended to be viewed as less attractive, suggesting that a representative sample of persons is needed to produce an accurately average face to be beautiful. Why is this? Langolis and Rogman maintain that less averaged faces are more attractive by definition because they are more prototypically face-like. In other words, it is the average of faces that actually defines what a face should look like, and things that deviate from that average face are viewed as deviant. Thus, this leaves us with the almost paradoxical position that persons who stand out for their beauty do so because they represent the ultimate average of all other faces. Of course, such averages change across time and cultures, a fact which is not inconsistent with, but rather simply beyond the Langolis and Rogman idea. Why do we like likers? Beauty is just one characteristic which people find attractive. As implied earlier, people also may find other things attractive. Good social skills, for example. Let's briefly look at one other dimension. Do people like people who like them? If a person is a liker, are they more likely to be liked or found attractive? The general answer is yes. We are more attracted to people who like us than those who don't. However, this has to be taken into consideration with another factor. But we do not like people who like everybody. Namely, persons who are moderately hard to get can be perceived as the most attractive. Consider the following study by Rex Wright and Richard Contrada. And please come to class for my caveat on this. Participants evaluated potential dating partners who were presented as being non-selective. Basically, they said yes to virtually everyone. Moderately selective, they usually say no, but sometimes said yes. Or extremely selective, they almost always said no. Results suggested that the moderately selective person was the most attractive. The moderately selective person was consistently preferred over the non-selective person and generally preferred over the extremely selective person. Thus, being perceived as completely indiscriminate in who they like will not make a person to be perceived as more attractive. Rather, being perceived as someone who likes specifically the other person will make a person also be perceived as more attractive. By the way, being perceived as a liker also seems to have the following disadvantage. They are typically perceived as less intelligent. Highly critical dislikers are typically perceived as brilliant but cruel. Okay, so that's a survey of some evidence concerning particular types of people who are more likely, in general, to be found attractive, and some issues surrounding those people. Now, let's look at the other side of this coin and ask the question, are there differences among people as to what they are attracted to? Do certain types of people, in general, tend to be attracted to certain other types of people or to certain characteristics of people? The main variable of interest we're going to look at is more specific, namely gender. So, do men and women differ on what they perceive as an attractive partner? Evidence definitely suggests that there are some differences. Namely, research suggests that men are more likely to emphasize the importance of physical appearance in a potential partner than women, while women are more likely to emphasize the importance of provider traits. Women are more likely to rate good financial prospect and industrious in ambition higher than men. This difference has been found in at least 37 different cultures worldwide by David Buss in 1989. It should also be noted, however, that some research in North America suggests that women are just as likely to discuss the importance of physical attractiveness in persons they've actually been out with on a date, suggesting that it might be more important to them than the potential or ideal partner ratings suggest. Evidence across cultures also suggests that men prefer and marry younger women as partners, while women prefer and marry older men. This suggests that whatever else is the case, in some sense, men are more concerned with physical beauty, assuming that young women on average are more beautiful than older women, while women are concerned with providing potential, assuming that older men are on average more able to provide resources. This finding is generally undisputed. However, its interpretation has been the source of an immensely contentious debate. So where do these differences come from? Evolutionary psychology. Differences between men and women emerge out of differential pressures on men and women in ancient human environments. In one camp, the evolutionary psychologists led by David Buss and Doug Kenrick argues that these differences are biological in origin. More specifically, they suggest that these differences emerge out of the differential evolutionary pressures on men and women, way back in the past. This perspective suggests that most of what we are today psychologically is the result of natural selection, which occurred over millions of years in the past. The basic idea is that those traits will die out which, one, are not likely to get passed on genetically because they promote death, or two, they're not likely to get passed on genetically because they hinder reproduction. Those traits which survive, the argument goes, are, thus, those that maximize gene survival. Selection pressures are those things which are likely to impact which genes get passed on. For instance, if one lives in an area where saber-toothed tigers often kill people, then genes relevant to the ability to avoid saber-toothed tiger attacks would be important, and thus saber-toothed tigers would be considered a pressure. Women bear children. So men can have thousands of children, while women can have a more limited number. Now the argument goes, one particular biological fact made men and women face different selection pressures, namely that women, unlike men, had to bear the children. This has one particular consequence. It means that men can have thousands of children in their lifetime if they do so by different women, while women can have only a limited number, say between 12 and 25. Now, the argument of evolutionary psychologists is that because of this consequence, It would be more important to women if they wanted their genes to survive to really ensure that those 12 or 25 children they actually had would survive. This would be less important to men because they could potentially have thousands of children. And thus a better strategy for men would be to identify as many fertile women as they could. Thus goes the argument the selection pressures differed for men and women. Those men who would have maximized their genetic potential would be those who had as many different fertile partners as they could. Thus, they prefer young and beautiful women. This actually suggests the origins of beauty, namely that beauty is what men perceive to be fertile. And women, who don't have the admittedly better option of having thousands of children, must, to maximize their genetic potential, ensure that those children that they do have actually survive. Thus, they value not youth and fertility, but rather the ability of men to offer resources to accomplish this goal.